Let 'em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hi, MacKenzie. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Let 'em Go Barefoot podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I have so many questions to ask you. I've been following your work for a while and find what you're doing to be intriguing and exciting, especially this time in our history. And to me, I find it to be part of what I've coined the Great Educational Awakening.
That's the
It's,
thing, Missy. It's such an exciting
it,
time in education. Like, this is the next 10 years, I think, is going to be such an awesome time to be a parent taking a kid through, their learning journey. It's very exciting and it's long overdue.
It's so long overdue. And, I've been in education for close to 30 years and I've participated in public school, private school, small micro schools. I've tutored, homeschooled. And so I've seen a lot in the educational realm. And yeah, I'm just so excited about it because it's like, this is the next iteration. And it's fun to watch people slowly but surely join in and say, yes, you're right. I have seen the public school and the standard schooling model kind of play out. And now it's time for it to sort of step aside. And I'm not saying there's not a place for some of what is currently going on in schools and people need something that they can depend on that's structured and standard and available, but there is a better way. And you saw that early on when you had young children. So why don't you tell us kind of how you got to where you are?
Yeah, I will absolutely do that. So, if you take it way, way back, I was a great student growing up. I loved playing the school game of getting A's, but I hated school. I was always that kid who would raise my hand in the classroom and be like, I'm sorry, why do I need to know this? Like, how does this apply to anything I'm doing?
Mm,
And so I remember when I graduated from Stanford University on my last final, I literally tipped the top of my head and said, I'm done. I'm never walking into a school again.
mm.
And then ironically, that's what I spend all my time doing now
I
is
know.
being in school. I think God laughs at your plans, right? When you have
Right.
that. But yeah, when it was time for my husband and I to send our daughters to school, we were going to send them to our local public school, which is considered a phenomenal district in our town in Austin, Texas. And my husband and I had both been products of public school. And I think we were in the same boat that I find so many parents to be in now, which is, school is school. You just do it. And the way I did it is probably good enough for, my kid. And so we sent our kids to our local public school. And then very quickly, I started just noticing that it was really hard for the school to provide any sort of personalization, if kids didn't fit exactly in the box, right? And that's
Right.
everything from, the kid who's a little bit bored because they already know the material to the kid who is lost and needs extra assistance and, can struggle with that. And I spent about 2.5 years really working hard within the system just as a volunteer and an engaged parent saying, what can we do for this? And I'll never forget, I had a conversation with the principal one day, and she's a phenomenal administrator, absolutely just a dedicated, professional, incredible person. And she said, "MacKenzie, I totally understand your frustrations and what you want, but this is like trying to steer the Titanic. It just can't
Mm,
be done." And
mm-hmm.
at that moment, I realized, okay, I'm not going to let my girls go through the career in school that I went through of not liking it, just learning to play the game, which, on the one hand, it's like you learn to play the game, or a lot of kids check out and are like, screw this, I'm done. I'm not doing
Right.
this, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, we're not going to do this. There's too much time for my kids to be sitting here bored in school and just learning how to play the school game. And for me, it wasn't about a private school versus a public school experience. It was about the model. And
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, the model of a teacher in front of a classroom teaching 20 plus kids all in a time-based system is not, it doesn't work, right? We've
Right.
had it for close to 200 years. and it doesn't work. Learning science has shown for years that that's the worst way to learn. And they've
Mhm.
also shown that the best way to learn is one-to-one mastery-based tutoring. And of course, that hasn't been available until recently. And now with technology, it is available.
Yeah.
We can give every single student exactly the level and pace of information they need. And then we can transform the role of the adult in the classroom from having to grade papers and create lesson plans and do lectures to do what they do best, which is connect with the kids and help them with regard to motivational and emotional support.
Yeah.
So, all that to say, I started my first school 10 years ago, and now we have about 8 schools in 2 different states, and we're expanding across other states. And we're also launching our homeschool program,
Oh,
kind of
wow.
under this fundamental idea of 2 hour learning. And, I have a podcast called Future of Education,
Yep.
and I'm actually sitting in the podcast room at our school. Our high school is where my podcast room is. And every day I walk into this podcast room and I see the sign that says Future of Education. And I just realized the future is here
Mhm.
now,
Yeah.
which is why it's such an exciting time.
Oh, I love that. Gosh, yes, it is. I mean, I mean, to sound kind of silly, but I get tingles. I really do because
I
it's
love it.
true. It's so important for people to wake up to the idea that they can be part of history right now in terms of changing the trajectory of how they view education, how they view learning, and recognizing that their kids are special and important and deserve to have the opportunity to learn in the way that's best for them. I mean, we have in all of our schools the special education department or special education teachers, which is what I got my master's in, and I worked with kids with special needs. But the reality is I learned very quickly how frustrated I became as a teacher trying to do everything. Like you said, the administrative stuff, the grading the papers, the working to try to individualize for the kids, creating IEPs, which take forever. And then, what do you have left over? You're exhausted, you're tired, you really don't have much more extra to give to all the individual kids you need to work
Oh
with.
my goodness.
So it's impossible
No.
to ask of one person. I mean, even as a parent of 2 kids, I have had found sometimes it's hard for me to divide myself up for the kids when they were younger. And so just imagine doing that times 30 kids in a classroom that you're
Well,
supposed to teach.
there's no question. Teachers are they're underappreciated, they're overworked, and they're underpaid.
Mhm.
And it's time to change that. And that's the other thing is that, you know, all of the money and resources that have gone into education to try to reform education, they haven't worked
No.
because, there's no way that you can ever get this student teacher ratio low enough to where, they're really able to provide that kind of mastery based learning at that pace. And so that's what gets me so excited is with the advent of technology and artificial intelligence, we really do have the scalable solution that can meet every kid. And like you were saying, Missy, is that, every kid deserves to have basically a spotlight put on them to say, hey, how can we help you really unlock your potential? And what I fundamentally believe is that every kid is capable of academic excellence. And it doesn't need to take all day of sitting
Mm-mm.
in school. And, the homeschooling community has known this forever. You don't need all day to crush your academics. You can do it in a couple hours. And then, at our schools, we spend the rest of the day learning life skills, which are so critical. And that's what I think most parents really care about is equipping their kids with the skills that they're going to need to be successful when they go out into the world.
Right. Well, so how did you come up with this idea of the 2-hour learning? I mean, I know, you said you started your first school 10 years ago, so that's 2014. So
Hmm.
you've obviously had some time to work out the kinks and figure out what makes the most sense and how to organize things. I have just, and I ask this because I tutor and work with kids individually and families. And, I've had so many times where parents will look at me and just say, like, what do you mean you can do this in about 2 hours a day? And I'm like, well, let me just say, yes, it depends on the kid and it depends on kind of what your goals are. But when you really think about sitting down and being focused and setting a plan to learn the things you want to learn, it doesn't take 6, 7 hours plus homework time, and you avoid all the distractions and everything. But for you all, do you have to follow a particular curriculum or the state standards? So how does that work?
Yeah. Well, so when we first started, my daughters were in third grade and first grade. We started in a very small micro school environment. We had 16 students. We were really doing that kind of one room schoolhouse model. And back then, there were adaptive apps. So we knew that we were going to use app based
Mhm.
learning. And we implemented the Pomodoro technique, which is basically the idea of take 25 minutes and set a timer and have the kids do this focus time for 25 minutes. And what we realized was, okay, 25 minutes of math, 25 minutes of language, 25 minutes of reading, 25 minutes of science. By the time you kind of got through that, these kids were really crushing their work. And it was like, okay, well, that actually is kind of about what comes around to 2 hours, right? So we do four subjects, 25 minutes each, and then we have a 20-minute, subject time for they can go back to some other things as kids get older. Then we're adding more, history and social studies and things like that into the curriculum. And so it was very natural early on that we knew that we could just spend the morning doing academics. My goal at our schools has never been that our kids would graduate high school by the time they were in seventh grade.
Right.
So we're like, okay, it's not like we're trying to get them to go that fast. But then the other thing that's happened over the last several years is we started understanding that we needed to put some guardrails on to make sure kids were learning efficiently because as great as apps are, they actually don't work very well if you just hand a kid an iPad and say, "Hey, work on this app."
Mhm.
For example, kids might not be focused. They might not, they might jump around and hop out, or they don't read the explanations or whatever. Or you could even have like our first year. I remember we had a first grade student who loved math, and he was in eighth grade math, but he couldn't read the math problems because his reading wasn't great and he hadn't focused on reading. And we realized, okay, you know what? We need to make sure kids are spending time in every subject. And, there are a lot of different um, schooling models where they say, hey, let a kid just explore the things they're interested in. And if they don't want to do reading for a while, that's okay. And I had the opposite opinion. I believe that we are a very academically rigorous experience. 2 hour learning wants kids to be in the top 10%. And we're big fans of that academic rigor. It's just, it's not as hard to do as a lot of people think because again, if you are really providing kids with the exact level and the exact pace of curriculum that they need, they can do that. And so, in answer to kind of what are we teaching, we're using K through 8 Common Core. So it's the same curriculum that students in traditional schools are getting. We're just doing it a lot faster, and then we're using artificial intelligence to cater the experience that the kids are having to connect it with interests that they have, and then, most importantly, really plug in the knowledge graph of what a student knows and what they don't know so that we're making sure that we're learning very efficiently and well. At the high school level, our students are doing the AP courses. They're doing all of those kinds of things that you're doing in high school. They're just doing it, much faster, more efficiently, and getting rid of all of the kind of junk work
Mm.
that is so common in schools. And we're very proud of the fact that our kids are really successful. Our classes are ranking in the top 2%, in the nation. In fact, I would argue there's no other school system that is getting the kind of academic results we're getting. And I'm sure, Missy, one of the questions that's probably coming up and your audience is wondering is like, how does she know where they rank? Does that mean she uses the dreaded word of standardized
Yeah.
tests, right?
Right.
No one likes standardized tests. And I will tell you, I generally agree with that. Standardized tests in the traditional model of education are horrible, right? They are stress inducing. Teachers are having to try to teach to these tests. But the reason that they're so brutal is because when you get the results of that standardized test, nothing changes
Right.
for that student based on those results.
Yep.
Nothing. It's
Mhm.
like here's a stamp of a grade on a school, but it doesn't matter how the kid does. What we've been able to figure out is that in our model, we can use standardized tests to provide information and feedback that we then plug back into our AI tutor in order to say, okay, if a student is a fourth grader and they've taken the fourth grade Texas STAR test and they're missing these concepts, we can go in and plug those in order to fill holes. And so as a result, our students and our parents and our guides who are teachers in our classroom, they all realize, wow, these standardized tests just provide me with information and feedback, which is fuel. And when used well, it's phenomenal.
Right. And there's an important piece to highlight there that the standardized test are meant to give a big picture view of a large amount of kids simultaneously. And so it can be beneficial if you can then take that information and actually do something with it, like you were saying. I mean, how many times
Exactly.
have they been done in the public school system or even the private school system? And it's kind of like, okay, well, that's on you now, kid, to catch up. And they're going to continue to get pushed through and get to the next level. And there's all these holes potentially in their foundational knowledge, and then it's just
Well,
a self-fulfilling
it's not
prophecy.
even, it's not even that. The thing about schools, so many traditional schools, they aren't transparent with the families about where their kids actually stand. So, for
Mm,
example, I always love asking the question. I'm a big fan of using NWEA map tests. And they're dynamic, so they move along with the kid based on, how much knowledge they have. And I'll ask people like, "Oh, does your school give map tests?" And there's always someone who says, "Yeah, my school uses map." And I say, "Do they give you the report for your child?" "Oh, yes, they do." And I say, "How long is that report?" And generally they'll say, "Oh, it's 1 page, it's 2 pages." And it's
mhm.
like, no, these reports are actually more like 18 pages.
Wow.
But schools don't provide families with that information. And the reason is because if they handed a family an 18-page report that goes through and shows, here's a lot of the holes in your child's education, it might make the family say, okay, well, what are you doing about that? And the answer in the traditional model is nothing. We
Mm,
keep moving along,
mhm.
and passing kids up to the next grade.
Right.
And that's the beauty of personalized learning, real personalized learning, that, the best homeschooler has the ability to sit down with their child and say, okay, let's go fill these holes. And an AI tutor really does it better than anybody and then allows the human to focus on what the human is best at, which is
Mhm.
connection.
Mhm. Well, and you said too, you take the information and plug it back into the AI tutor.
Yes.
Is this a software that you developed that your company created?
Yeah, it is. What we did was really we've used a combination of third-party adaptive apps that are apps that anybody could get. It's apps like iExcel, Alex, Grammarly, eGump, Outlier at the high school level, apps that are out there. But what we figured out in the last 10 years is that not all apps are equal at
Mhm.
all grades or all subjects. And so part of what my team has gotten really good at is we kind of figured out early on, like, okay, this app is really good for kids that are, up to third grade. This app is really good as they get into older grades. And then what else? The other thing I've done is I've started building some of my own apps. So we have just recently, our schools are using, and we're gonna roll this out to the general public, Alpha Read and Alpha Math, as well as Alpha Write. So we have some apps that we built ourselves, but the AI tutor, which is what is kind of guiding kids through this journey, is something that I've been able to create. And really, it's come out in the last year and a half.
Okay. Yeah, and I know too that you have adults in the classrooms with the kids, but you don't call them teachers. You call them guides, correct?
I do, and I will tell you, the adults that are in the classrooms with the kids are absolutely critical to our model's success. They are so critical. We do call them guides because instead of being, a sage on the stage, they are working right there with the kids, and their sole job is to provide motivational and emotional support in order to help kids get connected with their why, understand when they're feeling challenged, what are the things they will say to themselves and how can we help get them over hurdles? What are the motivation models that they love? And that's everything from, a guide who knows that a child loves time outside looking at, bugs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, get these goals done. And that earns you time for you and your guide to go outside and look at bugs together and, try and collect all the different bugs that are outside in our green belt, things like that. It's understanding really what makes a kid tick and how to get them excited. Because here's the thing, if you don't have a motivated learner, a student's not going to learn well,
Right.
right? And that's what I think traditional school has really missed the mark on. And it's something that a lot of homeschool parents have been able to figure out, which is like, okay, I know what gets my kid excited, and so let me help put work together in that way. And that's part of what we're working on within our homeschooling program as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's also the fact that you can look at your kids and say, okay, this person this child is really a night owl and enjoys some deep conversations at like 9 o'clock at night, or this one is a morning person that likes to get up and have a plan. And so you can really, really personalize. And most of the time, families have the flexibility to do that if they can modify the learning and academics and goals that their kids have. They can individualize, which you have a harder time doing with a larger group of kids. But your groups or your classes or schools are what would you say, like, amount of kids wise? Are you talking like 10 to 15 kids, or does it just vary?
Well, I mean, we've got, several hundred students that are at our schools. And what's really amazing about this is when you take the time that the adult usually would be spending doing lesson planning and teaching, and instead you turn that into time that they're focused on getting to know their students, um, they can get to know them very well. And one of the things I'm most proud of is we have a spreadsheet that I can open up, and every single student across all of our schools is listed on this spreadsheet, and it has the here's what motivates this child. And it's everything from this child loves words of affirmation, or this child gets really motivated by being able to earn the school currency and has their eyes set on buying this plushie that's in the emporium. This student doesn't react well to these types of things, and here's what I, the guide, am going to focus on this session to help motivate my student. And, it really, honestly, it kind of brings tears to my eyes whenever I pull this thing up, because I'm like, the fact that every single child is so known and so
Mm,
seen,
mm-hmm.
even in a large school environment, that's what's amazing. And again, that's what teachers and, people who have chosen to spend their career working in a classroom, they got into this business to positively impact children.
Right.
And, and that's what's so exciting about this too, is I really believe we can transform the role of the adult in the classroom so that teachers, instead of leaving the field, are going to be so excited to be a part of this. It makes their job more fun. And the other thing I believe is we have the ability to pay teachers more
Mm-hmm.
when we use this kind of model. And so, again, humans are critical to the model, and its success.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. So you have gone around the country, it appears lately, to try to talk to different school districts about the model.
Oh no, yes, it's been awful.
And I know you were in North Carolina not too long ago, which is where I
I
am.
was.
So can you talk to us about that? Like, what is your
Yeah,
goal when you go to these school
sure.
districts? And is it education to teach them about what's possible? Is it to really
Yeah.
allow this in the classroom? Like, yeah, tell us what that looks like and
Well,
why.
yes. So, when I started my first school, and all the schools that we currently have are private schools, right? They're private
Mm-hmm.
schools that I charge tuition for in order to get funding, for that. And one of the things that I need to do in order to make this model of education as scalable and accessible as possible is it needs to get public funding, right? Because not everybody can afford to send their kids to a private school.
Right.
And my schools, I have various price ranges of schools, for that offer different kind of levels of the types of experiences our students are doing. And I think that should be allowed. I think that if a person wants to send their kid to a super high end private school and they can afford to do that, that's great. And if they want something less expensive, that's great. But we have got to figure out how to unlock this type of education system for the masses, and so the best way to do that is I got to go through the public thing. And I decided that the best way to try this was to apply for charters in multiple states. So I have been on a little parade across the states, going in front of charter boards to try to get approval. And we've been applying for virtual charters, which basically is like homeschool,
Okay.
at home, but they'd be using 2 hour learning in the morning, and then we'd be doing life skills workshops online. And Missy, it's been a bloodbath. Nobody
Mm,
likes me. Nobody
mm,
likes me when I go out there. And it's interesting. I don't know if the reason they're saying is really legitimate. So, for example, in Utah and Arkansas, those boards said that they didn't believe there was demand for
what?
virtual education,
Oh my
which
gosh.
I think is bunk
I do too.
because students are leaving traditional education. Homeschooling is growing like
Yep.
crazy. And so I don't believe that's the answer.
Mm-mm.
In North Carolina, it was very interesting. They just generally were like, we don't like it. We don't trust this. We don't think it's going to work. We don't want to do virtual. I think I had posted on my Future of Education Instagram account. I was so mad when I left, and I was walking through the airport, and one of the people on the board had said, "Well, how are you going to ensure that children are eating healthy, balanced lunches,
Oh my
in your
gosh.
program?" And I'm literally like, okay, these are parents who said, I want to have my kids home and do virtual school. And we're, you know,
Yeah.
they're not going to do lunches. And by the way, as if the traditional public school system is doing a great job at delivering healthy lunches. I'll never forget one of the comments on that post was, my kindergartner went to school and her breakfast was a fruit roll up and a Rice Krispie treat.
Oh my
And
God.
so that was something like that. Now, I think there's also, honestly, between you, me, and now the world, since we're on a podcast, I think there are some things that are going unsaid
Mm,
that are kind of blocking this. And unfortunately, I think that's just part of the public school beast. What I believe is that the individuals who are working in the public school uh, system have, you know, good altruistic desires to help students, but for some reason, you get that whole group together and suddenly it turns into this beast
mhm,
that's really not interested in this. And I
mhm.
had a great conversation with a charter group that I'm hoping will be really helpful with us in Texas. And they were very thoughtful. They said, one of the things that we always wonder is, why aren't we getting more innovative models? But then we realized our application punishes people who are innovative
Yeah.
and outside of the box. So we're really looking at trying to figure out, how can we change our application so that we can embrace things like what you're doing.
Mm.
And so I'm still on the march. I will say I fired myself, and put someone else on my team in charge of doing the speaking, because I think I was a little too scary. I was like, we're revolutionizing education. The future of education is here, and we're going to transform the role of teachers. And my husband works with me on these things. He handles my finance side of the schools, and he looked at me and he's like, I think you might be too much, MacKenzie. Let's try a different approach. And you know what? One of the skills that we teach our students is to receive feedback and
Mm,
iterate. And I was like, yep, I think you're right. Let's have. And so we have a wonderful, wonderful guy on our team who is got an extensive history in the public school world, and I think he just knows how to speak the language.
yeah.
And so he's kind of graduated doing that. Although I will say it hasn't worked. Now, our big change that we're doing is, we're not going to continue applying for virtual charter schools. We are now going to move our focus to in-person charter schools.
Okay.
So again, that would mean that 2-hour learning would be free within those schools, which is still important, and they'd be in-person schools. And we'll see if that changes, because again, that was one of the excuses that the states have been using, is they just don't think there's demand for virtual. And then
Gotcha.
what we're going to do is, our homeschooling program will be something that families can use educational savings accounts if they're in a state that has ESAs. They'll be able to use that as part of the homeschooling. And kind of the idea behind our homeschooling program is, there are so many families who would love to homeschool, but they're just a little bit intimidated by the idea of, like, wait, I have to actually be my child's teacher, or be working this. And
Mhm.
what I think our 2-hour learning homeschooling program, called Alpha Anywhere, is going to really unlock is, it's going to provide the academic, you know, um, experience for the kids, and allow the parents to sort of outsource that academic part, and yet still get all the benefits of homeschooling.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're doing. And I honestly, I will tell you, Missy, when I started my first school 10 years ago, um, I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, do I need to be homeschooling? And I was like, oh no, I'm not homeschooling. And
Mhm.
so I
Yeah.
found another parent who wanted to be a guide, who was like, I will be the guide in the school with the kids, doing that.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to open up, because there are just so many incredible benefits of homeschooling experiences, as well as just in general making learning more efficient.
Well, and like you said early on, the data and the research is clear. We know how children learn. We know what works best. We know how to modify. And all of these things are just known facts, but people continue
Hmm.
to ignore them just to keep the machine rolling. And the red tape part, which is so frustrating when you were talking about the virtual, because I'm sure that there's some data somewhere that we can all pull up and look at the numbers, particularly the Zoom school that we called virtual schooling during the pandemic. Um, and that was just not an accurate reflection of what could really be. And furthermore, all well, there was a lot of colleges, but there's also community colleges. I mean, that is like the way they do things now. Community colleges almost are all virtual. Um, well, I shouldn't say almost all, but there's a huge option to be virtual in the community college space. And I think that just speaks to the idea that that gives people flexibility. It allows them to spend time doing the work versus traveling to the class and going into the school setting and then going back home. So it really makes things more efficient. And I think that can be the case too with
Yeah.
the K through
And
12 model.
and yeah, and the other thing about our, 2-hour learning program is this is not Zoom school that
Mm-mm.
so many people still have PTSD from,
Right.
during COVID. This is not a kid sitting on a computer with a teacher on the other side of the screen, providing, again, a time-based kind of lecture workshop. This is incredibly engaging one-to-one interaction. And, another pushback I often get from people as well, screen time is really bad for kids. And, here's the thing, I agree. Random screen time of kids doom scrolling TikTok or just watching YouTube or playing video games is not great for kids, right? But we are using a computer as a tool to provide kids with this one-to-one kind of mastery based tutor. And, it happens to be delivered via a screen, but it is not the same experience,
No.
in terms of interaction.
Right. Well, and as far as the adaptive AI goes, that's something that's been in my world for a while, and I've used it with kids that I've tutored and things. But for those who aren't familiar, can you give kind of just a like an insight on what that exactly means, and then like what does that look like in practice? So, like, I mean, you can just even use like
Absolutely.
one kid that comes to mind for you
Yeah.
that you've seen how it works.
Yeah, we had a child who started at our school last year as a fifth grader.
Hmm.
When the child, so one of the things that's a little bit unique about our private school experiences, we don't require, okay, we're only granting admission to kids who have certain grades or certain transcript or whatever. We're not looking at that because we really believe we can take any student wherever they come in and we can help get them caught up to speed. Or if they're advanced, we can really unleash them. But what we do is we give them some assessments in order to find out exactly where they are. So this particular student, as a fifth grader, was working really more in like second grade content across three subjects. Math, reading was kind of second grade level, which is a pretty big deal, right? And
Mm,
third grade is a critical time in a student's life because third grade is when students go from learning to read to reading to learn.
hmm.
And, so it's a big problem. Well, this kid's going into fifth grade and he's operating at a second grade level. That's the problem. What we're able to do is show this assessment and then put them into an adaptive app that is able to say, okay, let's go and fill in some holes from second grade. Let's fill the holes that you have in third grade, fourth grade. And pretty soon, within about a month and a half, this student had been able to fill enough holes that he was back working in fifth grade content. By the end of the school year, he was advanced in a couple of subjects. He was a couple years ahead. And again, this was done in a short period of time
Hmm.
because it's one of those things like if you're learning algebra and your fractions are shaky,
Yeah.
then it's really hard to learn algebra. But if you take that student who's in algebra and you go back and you revisit your multiplication tables and your division tables and, work on your fractions, suddenly you go back into algebra and it's like, this makes more sense. And this is the reason that so many students will fall off the math cliff at a certain point. And I don't know, Missy, if you did it. I fell off the math cliff in
Mm,
about ninth grade,
mm,
which was when math started getting harder, and more sophisticated. And what I look back and realize is I didn't have a strong mastery understanding of some of the fundamental concepts that you learn early on. And so then when I'm starting to move into geometry and pre-calculus and algebra 2 and all of that, I was like, okay, I'm super confused. And that's the beauty of these adaptive apps. Now, I will tell you the other thing about my model is I don't believe in a hybrid model where you have a student with a teacher-led classroom going through a subject, and then a few times a week they hop out and go do some adaptive app learning. What
Okay.
it does is it really further exacerbates the challenge, right, of where they're at. And so we're very true to the idea that our students use apps to do all of their learning, all of it. And then our guides are helping them learn how to learn, um, helping them uncover resources that they need in order to figure out how to learn. So they're never sitting there raising their hand waiting for a teacher to come over and say, okay, let me help you learn how to carry the one, and divide by this, or whatever.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the beauty, and that's why we're able to get such good results no matter where a student starts with us.
Right. Well, I do want to pick up what you said about the math part because I was a pretty decent math student. And then I got to geometry in ninth grade. This was back when ninth grade was still part of middle school. Um,
Hmm.
and I made an F in my first quarter.
Oh.
And so my report card read "fa" because I made A's everywhere else. And I have written about this before because if you think about that particular experience from me as a student, my math teacher who ended up working with me and I squeezed out a C in that class over the year. But if he had known how I was performing in the rest of my classes, maybe could have gotten to me sooner, right? Like here I am making A's everywhere else. I'm in the advanced program or whatever. And then, here I'm not getting it. So what was going on? And then, of course, I was fine. But the point is, I think when you have a student that you can work one on one with, or you have an adaptive app, that information, whatever's missing, whatever was not getting through to me early on in geometry, could have been rectified and addressed immediately. And then I wouldn't have had to suffer through that first quarter and that first semester because I did. I started being like, well, maybe I'm just stupid because I mean, I'm sitting in this class with all these smart people and I'm not getting it at all. And so, for whatever
And
reason,
yeah.
it just the translation, I got lost in translation, but then I turned it all around and I was fine.
Well, and that right there, Missy, is what's so sad is the number of kids that think I'm dumb
Mhm.
or I'm not good at this or I'm not a math person or I'm just I hate reading. You don't enjoy doing things that you're bad at or
Right.
don't understand, right?
Yep.
And what we always believe is that competence leads to confidence. And
Right.
suddenly when you're learning to read and you can understand what it is, I would not enjoy sitting in a reading a medical school textbook because I'd be like, I don't understand half the words.
Yep.
I'm having to, try to this versus someone who does understand that. And, what really makes me sad is when I will hear from parents who have already also accepted the label that's been put on their child of, hey,
Right.
my kid's just not a great school kid. My kid's kind of an average student. Listen, my kid's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And that, I mean, it's crazy, but that's really what people believe. And I believe kids are limitless. And I really believe all kids have the potential to do well academically, certainly in K through 8. Maybe not every kid is going to go be an astrophysicist major at MIT, but they can definitely do eighth grade
Mhm. Well, and they can learn that they are capable, and that is so
science. Hmm.
powerful. It just reduces the shame that so often can happen in a school setting because you're comparing yourself constantly. I mean, you can't help it. Kids can't help it. I mean, I know that that felt like when you're doing a test in biology and everybody's turning their test in and you still are working on, you're only on page 2 and there's 4 pages. I mean, what does that do? You're
Hmm.
like, "Oh, well, obviously I'm not doing well and I need to hurry up and I need to just get it in." So that's not learning, right? That's just
Yeah,
racing.
or think about kids that are, as you know from your time in special education, having to, get pulled out twice a week to go to the remedial class,
Mhm.
is terrible for kids as far as confidence boosting and all of that. And then let's look on the other side. The kids who are in the gifted program, that gifted program is, what, maybe twice a week of
Mhm.
45 minutes, where they get this extra kind of project to work on. And I remember that was one of the things that I was early on, was frustrated with. My daughter had been identified as gifted and talented, so she qualified to go to this program. And I showed up for a presentation that she and her classmates were giving, and there were only probably 6 students, so there's 10 or 12 parents at most in this little room. And I remember the teacher was putting a microphone on one of the students around their neck. And I said, "Oh, what is that?" Because it looked a little different. And then she said, "Oh, it's a microphone." I said, "A microphone, for what?" And she said, "So that people can hear what the student says. It'll amplify their voice." And I said, "Well, I mean, you know, there's 12 of us in this
Right.
room. I don't feel like we need to, that doesn't seem super necessary. We're in a tiny room." And she said, "Well, otherwise, they can't hear because so many of the kids, they just talk down and they're very quiet." And I looked at her and I said, "Why would you not be using this opportunity to teach public speaking skills and,
Mhm.
projection?" And she looked at me like, I had 3 heads. And I'll never forget, I walked up to my daughter, who was poor thing at first grader at the time, and I was like, "You are not wearing a microphone. You're going to do what we talked about. You're going to practice this thing." And so actually that was one of the things when we started the school the next year. Public speaking and entrepreneurship, financial literacy were the life skills that we first identified we're going to really work on.
Mm.
And it was because of what I saw. And that was in the gifted and talented program.
Yeah,
They weren't even thinking about, things like public speaking,
and
with
life
kids who
skills,
are
right?
very capable of doing that. Yeah, and that's the whole other part is life skills. There's just not time and there's not attention put towards that in the standard system.
Yeah.
And, that's critical. As one of the things I believe is that in this day and age, with the fact that we have so much knowledge at the tips of our fingers, via technology, it's no longer about the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's now about the 4 C's. It's critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity.
Yeah.
And what are the things that we're doing to equip our children to be successful in those areas?
Mhm. Well, there's a couple of things I want to get to before we have to wrap up because you talked about the life skills section, and I think the financial literacy piece is so huge. It's so huge.
Mm,
And then also the confidence building, the public speaking. So part of your program is the academics in the morning, and then the kids have the freedom to do the things that they want to do. So when you bring a child in or a family is interested, it's obvious they have to be on board with the philosophy and understand kind of the goals and the mission of the school. But do you have like an interview process that you do with the kids to say, like, let's figure out what makes this kid shine? What are they interested in? And what sort of goals do they have? And do you do that for all kids? Is it K through 12 that you do this with, or only the high
yeah.
schoolers, or how does that look?
Yeah. So in kindergarten through 5th grade, well, first of all, for all of our students, we have them do a shadow day, and they get to come and spend the day at the school. They work on apps to see how they like working on a computer. And I will tell you, the vast majority, it is very rare that we have someone shadow and say, "Oh, I don't like this way of learning" or whatever.
Mm.
And they get to spend a day at the school being part of this. And what we're looking at is coachability, right? Does this kid seem like they could maybe get turned on to being sort of curious and interested in something like that? But in kindergarten through 5th grade, we have a variety of workshops that teach life skills that kids get to participate in the afternoon. And those workshops, some of them will change every 6 weeks. Others will be year-long workshops. So, for example, our fifth and sixth graders last year ran a real Airbnb, and that was a
Oh,
full year workshop.
wow.
They learned all kinds of things from that experience. Our kindergarten students this year, for the first session, they did a 5 mile bike race. And of course, some kindergartners came into school in August not knowing how to ride a bike. Others already knew how to ride a bike. And so they were working on gear shifting and agility course training and things like that. But the bottom line is it was a teamwork exercise and a grit exercise where in the end the kids did that. Our third and fourth graders participated in a Spartan race where they were learning grit and teamwork. And part of it is that they all had to cross the finish line at the same time. That was a teamwork workshop. So there's all kinds of activities that they do. Then in middle school, we still have the workshop model, but we help students start to think about what are the things they're interested in? What are those priorities? And we have something called the Genesis Project, where students are able to kind of focus on a year-long project that starts getting them the idea of like, what am I maybe interested in pursuing? What am I wanting to do? Once we get to the high school level, at that point, we have what's called an Alpha Masterpiece Program. And this is the idea of a really ambitious project that is like as impressive as being an Olympian, right?
Mm,
We all think that's pretty cool if you can be in the Olympics. So what's the equivalent of that in something else that a student is doing? And so during, if for a high school student, we don't require that a student come into the school knowing exactly what they want to work on. What we do require is that they have a passion and desire to work on something, right? And
mhm,
unfortunately, this is one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing with transition into our model of learning. We have very, very easy time transitioning kids who come from standard school when they're younger, but it gets harder in ninth grade when often kids have been trained to be more passive in their
okay.
learning. They kind of know, hey, I go, I do the school thing, and then that's kind of it. And I was having a conversation with a young man last spring who was a very good student at his school. And I was talking to him about our school, and he said, it doesn't sound that interesting to me. And I said, really, why not? He said, well, I have no idea what project I would work on. And I said, well, you don't, there's nothing you think gets you excited. And he's like, yeah, no. Plus, I'm just too busy with academics. Like, there's nothing there. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is an example of a successful student because he's getting good grades at his school, but he doesn't have a burning passion. There's no fire.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that's what we're looking for at our high school level is kids who say, I know there's something else I can be working on. And as a result, our kids do really amazing things.
Yeah, and it takes it puts them into the equation versus giving them projects and telling them what they have to do and what is important to the school or the teacher versus
For
let's
sure.
get the kids buy-in here, and why not go ahead and use that power of self-directed education,
Yes,
and
we're really
interest.
creating self-driven learners.
Absolutely.
That is something that is very important. We want to give kids the tools to realize that they can do anything they set their minds to. They can learn how to learn. They can become experts. They can develop, the skills that they need to go do hard things. And as a result, we've created a culture where kids feel like excited to be challenged and they respect each other for that. And,
Mhm.
one of the criticisms that I'll hear from online, if you go to Future of Education, you'll hear people say, well, you're a private school, so you get to pick your kids and you could probably you don't have those behavioral issues. And what I really fundamentally believe is that when you provide kids with a sense of ownership
Yeah.
in their community and their culture, they call themselves and each other to a higher standard. And that's where we see that. So, we have town halls that students meet at every week within their levels, which are basically, 2-year age grades. And they're able to kind of say, like, what are the community standards that we want to uphold? And when you have another kid who's looking to you and relying on you, and you're relying on yourself, you know, I believe that kids rise to the
Mhm.
occasion. I really believe that kids are so capable of so much more than certainly the traditional school system gives them credit for, and a lot of parents give them credit for.
Yeah. Well, that's the power of community and power of belonging. Because when
Hmm.
you are in a setting where people have your best interests at heart and it's very clear and they're consistent, and every
Yes,
year you're not finding a new person to relearn you, then
yes,
that's where children can shine because it's literally in an environment that wants to make them reach the fullest potential that they can reach. I
exactly.
love that. I know you have a podcast called The Future of Education.
Yes.
You have Instagram, which is 2 Hour Learning, and you have a website. What else should people know or learn about you to help them follow along and enjoy your journey?
Yeah, I think one of the goals that I have is I want parents to get inspired and realize that, they don't just have to put their kids on the bus that takes them to the nearest school down the street. There are other options for them. And that's everything from, maybe homeschool is the right answer, maybe find a micro school in your community, or a great charter school that's doing good work. Just understand that you can find what works for your kid. And one of the things that my husband and I did, because I will tell you, those first few years at the school, it was a
Mm,
roller coaster ride for us. And my husband is really great about when I get stressed out, he's a very calming influence. And he would say to me, Mackenzie, all we have to ask ourselves is, are our children
Yeah.
thriving right now? Are they in the best place to thrive? And I will say we were fortunate because we always knew we could have our kids back in that public school, tomorrow if we needed that to be the case. And so we would look at each other like, no, our kids are, they're thriving. And, that continued. And now my daughter is a freshman in college. She graduated from Alpha School last year and she had a phenomenal career. My younger daughter is a junior in high school. She actually tried a couple years as our public high school
Mhm.
just to see, and she decided after her sophomore year, she said, you know what? I realized I want to go back to Alpha. But she had that ability to really drive her education and where she was going. And so one of the things that we're also offering is we've had a lot of excitement and interest in what we're doing with 2 hour learning and with our schools. So we have the ability for, if a family is interested in bringing an Alpha school to their community, they have the ability to say, hey, I want to be one of the people who kind of spearheads this. So we've got about 5 cities that we feel like we've made a lot of progress on that we would like to open schools in this next fall. We have the ability to do a lot more. We just need to get, the families to kind of
Mhm.
be a part of that. And then we've also opened up GT School, Texas Sports Academy, NextGen Academy, other schools as well. And then again, as we get charter status, I'm really excited to bring this model of education to
Yeah,
more
me too.
people.
Me too. I think that that's going to be, I'm going to just will it to be the case for the next 5 years. We're going to see some real
Oh, thank
changes.
you.
When you said GT schools, do you mean like a gifted talented school?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we have one school called GT School, which is for gifted and talented schools students. That school is our only school where we do have an admission requirement. They've got to be top 10%
Okay.
in some subject or have taken sort of a cognitive assessment. But I'll tell you what's crazy about that school. Those students, I mean, it's like they are drinking rocket fuel. When you really unleash a kid
Yeah.
to be able to learn at their own pace
Yeah.
and then work on life skills development. It is such, I love visiting that school
Mm.
because it is just the energy there is so exciting because these kids are just like obsessed. And what we've made sure with our guides across the board are just absolutely phenomenal. But our guides at GT school are also, Harvard graduate math majors and physics majors
Mhm.
and national champion, debaters from Ivy League schools. And again, not to say that Ivy League is, the end all be all. But the bottom line is when you have a gifted and talented student, you got to be quick, right?
Mhm.
You got to be really quick in order to keep up with them. And those guides, they're the quickest of the quick that are up there. And so they do a lot of really fun things there at GT School. And their afternoon life skills workshops are really around kind of academically rigorous things, robotics and coding and chess and writing books and publishing books and, all of those debate, all those kinds of things that kids love. And then you compare that to like our sports academy, where our students are spending all afternoon just being outside and playing and doing kickball and capture the flag and soccer and basketball and agility courses and training and all those kinds of things. But not only that, they're also doing things like negotiating their major league baseball contract and then building their personal budget and then announcing, writing the press release for their Nike, sponsorship, and then designing the ad campaign that they're going to do for that Nike sponsorship. So there's so many ways that you can incorporate life skills development into things that kids are interested in.
Mhm.
And that's a lot of fun. So really, when you think about it, another thing that people can do, there's people out there who say, "Gosh, I would love to start a school in my community, but ooh, the academics seems tough. How do I make it work?" And so that's the other thing is we offer. People can say, "Let me license 2 hour learning. We'll do 2 hour learning in the morning, and in the afternoon we have." Free to do whatever it is, that gets kids excited. So that could be performing arts. It could be entrepreneurship, it could be you name it. It could be
Mm.
horseback riding, something specific. There's always an opportunity for kids to go out and learn life skills through any sort of thing they love. Maybe it's the wilderness school, where you do academics in the morning and then it's, mountaineering and survival skills all afternoon. Whatever gets kids excited is what's available.
Gosh, that's so wonderful. The sky is really the limit here, and it
Mm.
makes me wanna go back in time and be a kid again
You
so I
know
could
what,
do it.
Missy? I so wish that I had gotten interested in education before my kids were of school age,
Mm,
because then I feel like I could be like 10 years ahead of where I'm at now.
I know.
Um, but I'll tell you the thing is I wake up every day so excited about what we're working on, because I really believe this can change the game for students everywhere. We see it every day in our schools. I get to talk to parents who are just so excited because they're like, my kid gets in the car at the end of the day, and instead of, being like, oh, school is fine. What'd you do? Nothing.
Mhm.
They won't stop talking about everything they worked
Right.
on. And
Right.
that for me was my favorite thing about watching my girls go through this school, experience was they were just so on fire, and it's really fun to see that. And I love watching that now with younger students as we continue to grow and expand.
Yeah, well, and I can feel that with your post on Instagram and the different stories that you share too with the students.
Oh,
You
it's
know,
so much fun.
yeah,
It's so fun.
it's very clear that it's working and people are happy and joyful and have found their space and place. And I'd love to see that spread across the country and the world. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for what you're
Thank
doing and for
you. Thanks
sharing
for
it with
having
us.
me. I love seeing your content as well. And I think that you provide a lot of inspiration too for families to realize that, there are other options out there for them. And I will tell you, I think we are so lucky because the people who are interested in, this podcast that you're doing, the podcast I do, and that content, they're people who've raised their hand saying, like, hey, I am growing, this young person, and I wanna make sure that I'm helping shepherd them through that process, and so they're cool people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's just people who when like, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right. I think I need to stand up and ask some questions and be considerate
Mhm.
of what other options there are. So there are plenty of
Exactly.
options. So anybody who's listening who feels a little stuck or trapped, just keep watching the videos, listening to podcasts, go to Mackenzie's page for sure and you will not be inspired. There's just no way you can
Oh,
can leave without feeling like
amazing. Well,
there's great things ahead. So thank you
good. Well,
again.
thank you so much. Thanks for giving me time to, share this vision.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. To learn more about guests on the podcast and to stay up to date on how they are showing up to make the world a better place for children and families, please check the show notes. To become a part of the great educational awakening and to keep up with my latest writings, offerings, and workshops, be sure you're signed up for my Substack newsletter. You can also follow along on social media at Let 'em Go Barefoot. That's LETEMGO Barefoot. If you are new to homeschooling, new to unschooling, or are simply unschooling curious but not sure where to start, we now have a beautiful 43-page downloadable guide that walks you through the how and why of self-directed education and child-led learning, as well as responses to common questions and concerns around academics, motivation, college, community, and more. You can find a link to purchase your copy in the show notes. Thank you so much for your support. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.